Key security guard, they called Slow Mike, was reviewing camera footage when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The same unmarked van had circled the federal building for 4 consecutive days. Always at exactly what he discovered next would expose a terrorist plot that had been 18 months in the making. From which city are you watching this incredible story of vigilance and courage today? If you believe that sometimes the most overlooked person in the room sees what everyone else misses, hit that subscribe button. These stories of real security heroes need to be told. Mike Rodriguez had been working security at the federal building in downtown Phoenix for 3 years. And in those 3 years, he'd never quite fit in. At 58, he was older than most of the team. While his colleagues could navigate the digital surveillance systems with smartphone-like ease, Mike still printed out reports and kept handwritten logs in a notebook that had seen better days. The younger guards called him Slow Mike behind his back, though never with real malice. He was the guy who took 20 minutes to do a 10-minute perimeter check. The one who asked follow-up questions during briefings when everyone else just wanted to clock in and start their shifts. The security supervisor, Janitors, often found herself waiting for Mike to finish his methodical equipment checks, while the rest of the team was already at their posts. What they didn't know was that Mike Rodriguez had spent 25 years as a detective with the Phoenix Police Department before retiring. He'd worked everything from burglary to organized crime, developing an eye for patterns that most people missed. His slowness wasn't inefficiency. It was thoroughness born from decades of experience where missing a detail could mean the difference between closing a case and letting a criminal walk free. The federal building housed multiple agencies, IRS offices, Social Security Administration, FBI field office, and DEA regional headquarters. It was the kind of target that required constant vigilance, the kind of place where complacency could have devastating consequences. Yet to most of the security team, it had become routine: scan IDs, check bags, monitor cameras, write reports. Day after day, week after week, the same predictable rhythm. But Mike had never stopped seeing the building through a cop's eyes. Every face that entered was potentially significant. Every vehicle that lingered too long in the area got noted in his personal log. Every change in pattern, no matter how small, triggered his investigative instincts. It was a Tuesday morning when Mike first noticed the van. Gray, unmarked, probably a few years old, but well-maintained. Nothing suspicious about it individually. Delivery vans, service vehicles, and unmarked cars were common in the downtown area. But as Mike reviewed the previous day's camera footage during his shift, something nagged at him. The van had circled the building. Not just driven past, circled. At 3:47 p.m., it had appeared on the east camera, traveled around the building's perimeter, and disappeared from view heading west. The driver hadn't stopped, hadn't parked, hadn't even slowed down noticeably. But the route was deliberate, methodical. Mike made a note in his logbook. Gray van, no plates visible. 3:47 p.m., building perimeter. Wednesday came and went normally. Mike worked the day shift, handling the usual stream of federal employees, visitors and contractors. Around 3:30 p.m., he found himself unconsciously watching the monitors more carefully. Then, at exactly 3:47 p.m., there it was again. The same gray van, following the exact same route around the building. This time, Mike was ready. He switched between camera angles, following the vehicle's progress. The driver appeared to be alone, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. The van's windows were tinted just enough to make identification difficult, but not so dark as to draw attention. Most importantly, Mike managed to catch a partial view of the license plate. The first 3 characters appeared to be 7R4, before the angle made the rest unreadable. "Hey Torres," Mike called to his supervisor, who was reviewing the duty roster at her desk. "Can you take a look at this footage with me?" Janitors walked over, slightly impatient. Mike had a reputation for finding significance in mundane events. Last month, he'd spent an hour documenting a suspicious individual who turned out to be a lost tourist looking for the courthouse. "What am I looking at, Mike?" she asked, watching the van complete its circuit on the monitor. This van has circled the building 2 days in a row, exact same time. 3:47 p.m. Torres squinted at the screen. Could be coincidence. Maybe it's a delivery route. Or someone who works in the area. Delivery vans stop to deliver. This one just circles and leaves. Maybe they're lost. Mike looked at her seriously. Lost people don't get lost at exactly the same time 2 days in a row. Torres sighed. Mike's police background made him see conspiracies where others saw coincidences. Log it if you want, but don't spend too much time on it. We've got actual security protocols to follow. But Mike was already spending time on it. During his lunch break, he pulled up traffic camera footage from the city's database. A privilege his police background still afforded him. He traced the van's route before and after its circuit of the building. The vehicle appeared on traffic cameras approximately 6 blocks away at 3:35 p.m., traveled directly to the federal building, completed its circuit, then headed straight back toward the interstate. This wasn't random. This was reconnaissance. Thursday brought a sense of anticipation that Mike couldn't shake. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing everything he knew about vehicle surveillance techniques from his police days. Professional surveillance teams often used multiple vehicles and varied their timing to avoid detection. Amateur operations, however, often fell into predictable patterns. At 3:30 p.m., Mike positioned himself at the main security desk with a clear view of all camera monitors. He had his notebook ready, pen in hand, prepared to document every detail. 3:47 p.m. arrived like clockwork. The gray van appeared on the east camera, began its familiar circuit. But this time, Mike noticed something new. The van slowed slightly as it passed the main entrance, then again near the underground parking garage entrance. The driver was paying particular attention to entry points. Mike switched to the parking garage camera and saw something that made his stomach drop. A second vehicle, a dark sedan, was parked in a visitor space, near the garage entrance. It had been there for almost an hour, which was unusual for visitor parking. As the van passed overhead, Mike watched the sedan's headlights flash once. A signal. "Torres," Mike called out, his voice carrying an urgency that made his supervisor hurry over. "I need you to see this now." This time, Torres looked more carefully. Mike showed her the van's route, pointed out the timing pattern, then switched to the parking garage footage. "See that sedan? It's been there over an hour. Watch what happens when the van passes." As if on cue, the sedan's lights flashed. Torres felt a chill run down her spine. That's coordination. It's surveillance," Mike said grimly. "Professional surveillance. And we're the target." Torres immediately called her supervisor, who contacted the FBI field office within the building. Within 30 minutes, Agent Sarah Chen from the Joint Terrorism Task Force was reviewing Mike's footage and notes. Agent Chen was impressed by the thoroughness of Mike's documentation. "This is excellent work," she told him. "How long have you been tracking this pattern?" 3 days confirmed, but I'm wondering if it's been going on longer, and I just missed it. Can you pull footage from previous weeks? Mike had already started working with the building's digital archive system. He began reviewing footage from the past month, focusing on the 3:45–3:50 p.m. time frame each day. What he found was disturbing. The pattern went back 2 weeks. For 10 of the past 14 days, the same van had conducted the same circuit at the same time. The sedan had appeared in various parking locations around the building on 7 of those days. Mike had uncovered a systematic surveillance operation that had been ongoing for half a month. "This is big," Agent Chen said, studying the compiled footage. "This level of persistence and coordination suggests serious intent. We need to identify these vehicles and the people in them immediately." Using enhanced digital analysis tools, the FBI was able to clean up the license plate footage Mike had captured. The van was registered to a rental company in Tucson. The sedan's plate led to another rental company in Phoenix. Both vehicles had been rented with fraudulent identification documents. Agent Chen's expression grew grave as she shared this information with Mike and Torres. Professional surveillance using false identities and rental vehicles. This has all the hallmarks of a terrorist reconnaissance operation. While the FBI began tracking the rental histories and attempting to identify the surveillance team, Mike continued his pattern analysis. His police experience told him that surveillance operations usually escalated in phase. First came the distant observation, then closer reconnaissance, then operational planning. Agent Chen, Mike said during their evening briefing. In my experience, surveillance like this builds towards something specific. They're not just watching randomly. They're looking for something. What do you think they're targeting? Mike pulled out building schematics he'd studied during his initial security training. The main entrance is heavily secured. Metal detectors, X-ray machines, multiple guards. The parking garage has controlled access. But they keep paying attention to specific areas. He pointed to the camera footage, showing the van's slight speed reductions. Here, they slow down by the main entrance. Here, by the garage. But also here, by the loading dock. The loading dock. It was the building's most vulnerable point, used for deliveries and service access. While it had security cameras, it wasn't monitored as intensively as the public entrances. Large vehicles regularly entered and exited, making it difficult to scrutinize every arrival. If I were planning an attack, Mike continued, I'd want to know the loading dock schedule. When do major deliveries arrive? How many security personnel are present? What kind of screening happens there? Agent Chen immediately ordered increased surveillance of the loading dock area and began reviewing its security protocols. What she found confirmed Mike's suspicions. The loading dock had minimal screening procedures compared to the rest of the building. Large delivery trucks were visually inspected, but not subjected to the same rigorous security measures as smaller vehicles or personnel. Friday brought a development that transformed Mike's careful observation into an active counter-terrorism operation. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the gray van appeared as expected. But this time it wasn't alone. A third vehicle had joined the surveillance, a pickup truck that positioned itself with a clear view of the loading dock. The coordination was becoming more sophisticated and more obvious. Instead of avoiding detection, the surveillance team seemed to be moving toward operational readiness. Mike watched all three vehicles through the camera system, documenting their positions and timing. The van completed its circuit. The sedan flashed its lights from a new parking position, and the pickup truck remained stationary, its occupant clearly observing the loading dock activity. They're escalating, Mike told Agent Chen over the phone. 3 vehicles now, positioned to observe all critical entry points. This looks like final reconnaissance before action. Agent Chen had reached the same conclusion. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force activated a full surveillance response. Federal agents in unmarked vehicles began following the suspect vehicles when they left the federal building area. Additional agents were positioned around the building perimeter, and the security alert level was quietly raised. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the FBI's digital analysts, reviewing the enhanced footage of the surveillance team, recognized a face. The driver of the pickup truck was David Khalil, a 34-year-old engineer who had been fired from a defense contractor 6 months earlier after failing a security clearance renewal. His dismissal had been related to concerning social media activity and suspected radicalization. The identification of Khalil opened up the entire conspiracy. FBI surveillance of his residence revealed connections to a broader network of individuals with extremist sympathies. Phone records, financial transactions, and social media analysis painted a picture of an 18-month planning process for what appeared to be a major attack on the federal building. As the FBI investigation expanded, the full scope of the plot became clear. The surveillance operation was the final phase of preparation for a bombing attack planned for the following Monday. The target was the federal building during peak occupancy hours, when hundreds of federal employees and visitors would be present. The attack plan was sophisticated and deadly. The group had acquired explosive materials through a network of straw purchases across multiple states. They planned to use a large delivery truck, similar to those that regularly serviced the loading dock, to deliver the explosives directly into the building's interior. The surveillance had been mapping security responses, timing guard rotations, and identifying the optimal approach route. The van's circuits had been measuring response times and identifying camera blind spots. The sedan's positioning had been testing communication protocols and escape routes. Most chilling of all, The group had been conducting their surveillance for weeks without detection by anyone except Mike Rodriguez, the security guard his colleagues called Slow Mike. Monday morning brought a coordinated law enforcement action across Phoenix and Tucson. As the terrorist cell prepared to execute their attack, FBI agents surrounded their safe house, arresting 6 individuals and seizing enough explosive materials to level half the federal building. David Khalil and his co-conspirators were taken into custody without incident, apparently shocked that their carefully planned operation had been detected. During interrogation, they revealed that they believed their surveillance had gone completely unnoticed. They were wrong. One security guard's attention to detail and refusal to dismiss apparent coincidences had unraveled their entire operation. The news broke that evening. Federal authorities foil major terrorist plot against Phoenix Federal Building. The stories mentioned the FBI's excellent detective work, the coordination between agencies, and the successful prevention of what could have been a catastrophic attack. What the news stories didn't mention, because it remained classified, was that the entire investigation had started with one security guard noticing that a van had circled a building at the same time for 3 consecutive days. Mike Rodriguez returned to work the next day to find his colleagues looking at him differently. Word had spread through the security team that Mike's paranoid attention to detail had prevented a major terrorist attack. The nickname Slow Mike quietly disappeared, replaced by genuine respect for his thoroughness and experience. Janitors pulled him aside during his shift. "Mike, I owe you an apology. And more importantly, this building owes you a debt we can't repay." Mike shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did my job, noticed something that didn't feel right and reported it. You saved hundreds of lives." "Maybe. But that's what we're here for, isn't it? To notice things that don't feel right." Agent Chen visited the building a week later to personally thank Mike for his work. She brought with her a commendation from the FBI director and an offer to join the bureau as a consultant on security matters. Mike politely declined the offer. "I like my job here," he said. "This building, these people, they deserve someone watching who actually pays attention to what they're seeing." In the months that followed, the federal building's security protocols were overhauled based on lessons learned from the terrorist plot. Mike's methodical approach to observation and documentation became the standard for the entire security team. His handwritten logs and careful pattern analysis were incorporated into formal training procedures. The building installed additional cameras and sensors around the perimeter. The loading dock security was enhanced with new screening procedures. Most importantly, the security team learned to take seriously any observation that deviated from normal patterns, no matter how minor it might seem. Mike continued working his shift with the same methodical approach that had always characterized his work. He still printed out reports, still kept handwritten logs, still took longer than his colleagues to complete his rounds. But now his thoroughness was seen as an asset rather than a limitation. During quiet moments, Mike would sometimes think about how close the attack had come to succeeding. If he had dismissed the van's pattern as coincidence, if he had been less persistent in documenting the details, if he had listened to colleagues who suggested he was overthinking routine events, hundreds of people might have died. The thought reinforced his belief that security work was fundamentally about vigilance, not the dramatic action movie kind of vigilance, but the quiet, persistent kind that noticed when normal wasn't quite normal anymore. 6 months after the arrests, Mike was asked to speak at a regional security conference about pattern recognition and threat assessment. Standing before an audience of security professionals from across the Southwest, he felt uncomfortable, but understood the importance of sharing what he'd learned. "The thing about security work," he told the audience, "is that most threats don't announce themselves with sirens and flashing lights. They look like normal activity that's just slightly off pattern. The challenge is training yourself to notice those small deviations and take them seriously." He clicked through slides showing the van's surveillance route, the coordination signals, and the timing patterns. This entire operation was hiding in plain sight. "If I hadn't been documenting everything methodically, if I hadn't been willing to sound paranoid to my colleagues, this surveillance could have continued indefinitely." After his presentation, younger security professionals approached Mike with questions about technique and training. They wanted to know how to develop the kind of observational skills that had detected the terrorist plot. Mike's advice was simple but profound. Treat every day like something important when it happened, because someday it will. Document everything that seems unusual, even if you're probably wrong, and never apologize for being thorough. The conference organizers later told Mike that his presentation had been the highest-rated session of the entire event. Security professionals across the region began implementing Rodriguez protocols, systematic documentation and pattern analysis procedures based on Mike's method. The prevented attack had consequences far beyond Phoenix. The FBI's investigation revealed that the terrorist cell had been part of a larger network planning coordinated attacks on federal facilities across the Southwest. Mike's detection of the Phoenix surveillance operation led to the disruption of plots in Albuquerque, Las Vegas, and Denver. The case became a textbook example in federal law enforcement training of how local security personnel could serve as early warning systems for terrorist activity. Mike's careful documentation and persistent reporting were cited as models for private security professionals working around potential targets. More personally, Mike's work had changed how his colleagues approached their jobs. The security team at the Phoenix Federal Building developed a culture of shared vigilance, where unusual observations were reported and investigated rather than dismissed. The slow Mike mentality, methodical, thorough, and suspicious of coincidences, became the standard rather than the exception. Janitors was promoted to regional security supervisor, in part based on her management of the terrorist threat situation. In her new role, she implemented Mike's documentation and analysis methods across federal buildings throughout Arizona and New Mexico. The building that Mike protected every day now stood as more than just a workplace for federal employees. It had become a symbol of how ordinary people doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary care could prevent extraordinary tragedies. Today, Mike Rodriguez continues working security at the Phoenix Federal Building. He still prints out reports, still keeps handwritten logs, still takes longer than necessary to complete his rounds. The difference is that everyone now understands why. Visitors to the building might notice an older security guard who seems particularly attentive, who asks follow-up questions, who watches the monitors with unusual intensity. They probably don't know that this quiet, methodical man prevented one of the largest terrorist attacks on American soil since 9/11. Mike doesn't talk about it. When reporters occasionally reach out for interviews about the prevented attack, he politely declines. When new security personnel join the team, he teaches them his methods without mentioning his role in the terrorist case. The work, he believes, should speak for itself. But sometimes, during quiet moments on the night shift, Mike will review camera footage from that crucial week in March, when a gray van started circling the building. He'll look at his handwritten notes, remember the skepticism of his colleagues, recall the moment when Agent Chen realized they were dealing with a serious terrorist threat. And he'll remind himself that vigilance isn't about being paranoid or suspicious. It's about caring enough about the people you're protecting to notice when something isn't quite right, and being willing to act on that notice even when others think you're overreacting. Federal Building stands secure, its employees safe, because one security guard understood that sometimes the most important work happens when nothing seems to be happening at all. In the years since the prevented attack, Mike has become something of a legend in security circles, but he's also become acutely aware of the weight that comes with such responsibility. Every van that circles the building now gets his attention. Every pattern that emerges from routine activity gets documented and analyzed. It's a burden he carries quietly, the knowledge that his vigilance might be all that stands between normal life and catastrophe. The terrorism prevention was public vindication of his methods, but it also reinforced how high the stakes really are. New security guards often ask Mike how he stays alert after so many years, how he maintains the energy to document every detail, analyze every pattern. His answer reflects the deeper truth about security work. You don't do it for the excitement or the recognition. You do it because people deserve to feel safe when they come to work. And sometimes you're the only thing making that possible. The real story of Slow Mike isn't about one prevented attack or one moment of heroism. It's about the daily choice to care enough to pay attention, to be thorough when others are casual, to trust instincts when others trust routine. In a world where security often means reactive measures and high-tech solutions, Mike Rodriguez represents something simpler and more fundamental. The power of one person who refuses to let vigilance become routine, who understands that protection is ultimately about human attention and human commitment. The gray van stopped circling the federal building on March 15th, when its driver was arrested. But Mike Rodriguez never stopped watching for the next threat, the next pattern, the next deviation from normal that might signal danger. Because in the end, that's what real security means. Not the technology or the procedures, but the people who care enough to notice when something isn't right and act on that notice, even when they're standing alone. Where are you watching this story from today? Have you ever worked with someone whose attention to detail made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if stories of everyday heroes preventing extraordinary threats inspire you, subscribe to Real Security Story, because sometimes the most important victories happen in security rooms and logbooks, not on front pages and news broadcasts.